Hi, I'm Brian. Welcome to Autogefühl and welcome to the hills just outside of Cannes. We've come here to bring you the brand new Peugeot 308. Now, the predecessor to this car sold over 1.3 million units. So to suggest that this C-segment car is important to Peugeot might be just a little bit of an understatement. We're going to take a closer look and find out just what they've done to it. There are so many changes that have taken place with this redesign, but I think it's important to mention right at the outset that there are 5 different trim levels. The entry level is the Active, then you have the Allure Pack, the GT, and the top one of all is the GT Pack. The car that we're driving here today is the GT, and that's really important to note because there are some styling differences that are quite significant between the different trim levels. Now, I want to start here. The 2 key things that immediately leap out at you are, of course, the badge redesign. Now, if you think this looks slightly familiar, you wouldn't be wrong. But the last time that the Lion's Head featured by itself without the body was all the way back in the 70s. So this is a very new generation for the Peugeot, and that matches this very new looking grille. If you're familiar with the predecessor to the 308, it felt a lot more standard. Now, usually you'd expect the 308 to be competing in the same sort of area as the Ford Focus and maybe the Skoda Octavia, along with a wide range of other cars. The first impression you get when you look at the front of this car is, are Peugeot trying to elevate their competitors slightly? Are they trying to play in a slightly higher field now? Here, because we're a GT line model, we have matrix LEDs. And this new feature, which Peugeot describe as being a lion's fang, well, okay, that's a nice bit of verbiage. I'm not entirely sure how accurate it is, but it's quite clever. It starts off as your daytime running light, but when you use the indicator, it immediately fills up that function. And it really ties in the design language, the new design language, I should say, for the front. 4 meters 64 or 183 inches is the length of this car. That's 6 centimeters longer, or about that, than the predecessor that went before it. But wait, it's also 2 centimeters lower. And look at these massive solid wheel arches. That to me is very, very reminiscent of American car design. So I'm starting to feel that there's more of a melding here between European aesthetics and American ideas in terms of bulk and mass, really presenting strength. Now, the wheels that you can get on this car are 16 to 18 inch. Because we have the GT line, then you do get 18-inch wheels that come as standard. Now, the most noticeable thing about the GT line on the side is this right here. Does that in any way look familiar to you? I would suggest, and I'm not the only person to have said it, that the car that leaps into your mind when you look at this is, of course, a Ferrari because of the badge location and, of course, the shield. Now, I don't know how much of that's intentional. Clearly, this is not a Ferrari, but it's a bold statement. And I think what Peugeot are saying here are, that's right, we're here. And if you buy one of these cars, it's not going to be enough just to sit in the pack anymore. You're going to stand out a little bit. The difference between the Estate and the hatch is also present up here when you look at these roof rails, obviously suggesting that you might want to put roof boxes on there. I feel like Peugeot have gone to a lot of effort to make sure that the hatch is very distinct from the Estate in its styling terms. Nowhere can you see that better than this rear light cluster here. Now again, the trim level is very important to this. This to me looks somewhat like collapsed dominoes, and it's quite dynamic when you actually see the rear lights and the indicator working. If you go with one of the lower trim lines, it's a flat presentation, so it doesn't look as dynamic and sporty. First of all, we have fake exhaust ports down on both sides. I hope we've come far enough that we've gotten over that a little bit. I mean, it is fairly standard for cars now, and really this is not a sports car, so it doesn't offend me as much as I think, okay, that's just a design touch. This, I think, is much more interesting. The decision to go with a black as a contrast to here. As you can see, I think the key design matched with the door design. Quality and solid materials are what they seem to be going for. And from the minute you grab hold of this and open the door, it feels very much like a quality product. It's just nicely put together and reassuring. And that might seem like a very obvious thing, but it's so important to car design. This is your customer's first interaction with the product, so you should put your hands on it and feel good about it. Okay, so nothing amazingly new and innovative there, but that obviously isn't the case when we start looking inside. If I come around here, you can see because of our trim line, we have a few unique and distinct details. Well, somebody obviously didn't speak to Thomas before they picked this car for us. As you might be able to see, we've got a lot of leather happening in here, but I can tell you that there are many different seating options. And again, if you haven't had the chance to look at the Thomas AJ review, the Alcantara seats are really nice indeed. As regular viewers will know, I'm 5'10" or 178 centimeters, but I have very short legs and a very long torso. So consequently, when you see me take a seat, the seat is quite far forwards as it's set for me. If you take a look over to the passenger seat, that's where Cornelius is sitting, and he has a more regular shape of body. So just that you have a good idea when we start playing around with the controls, that's specific to my body geometry. And why is body geometry so important for this car? Well, again, anyone who's familiar with a Peugeot redesign will have met this. This is the iCockpit. We're going to look at it in a little bit more detail in just a moment. But when married up with this, the very small square steering wheel, it's imperative for your enjoyment of this car that your geometry allows a clear line of sight between you and this display. So the only challenge that hits you immediately is whether or not you're going to be able to find a position that will give you the comfort for your driving, as well as your need to see those instruments. Design and styling is obviously very important to Peugeot, so I'm pleased always when borderless rearview mirrors are used in nice stylish environments. It just adds a touch of class, I think. As your eyes come down to the dashboard, what you'll find is a really pleasing use of materials. Yeah, sure, there are still hard plastics in here, but they're used really discreetly and they blend very well with the other materials to create an overall effect that looks really stylish, modern, and nicely done. The first thing that you're going to notice are these two screens. They're both 10 inches in diameter. This is the iCockpit and this is the infotainment system, which is all new for this model. Now, what you won't be able to pick up terribly well on camera, because of the way in which the camera's recording, is that this is what Peugeot call a 3D display screen. This is not standard across the entire line. You have to get one of the higher trim cars in order to get this. And what that means, if you can look at my hand, if you assume that the first layer of digital display is this and this is the back, the second layer is superimposed in front of it on another piece of clear glass or plastic. So that's where they get the term 3D. It gives you the impression that the data here is floating in front of the dials. I'm sure more than familiar with the idea of the piano keys that you can often get in Peugeots. Here they have been replaced by digital keys. And in order to make it feel more like what you would experience from a touch phone, say, if you put a 3-finger touch into the main screen, it will bring you to here, and these are all different options that you can customize as buttons. If you look slightly lower, all of these buttons are programmable. And what that means is if you want to switch one of these buttons out with something else, you can, and it's very straightforward and easy to do that. But I would say the only thing I'm a little disappointed with is there's no haptic feedback. So if you select an option, it is entirely reliant on you being able to listen out for that clicking noise that tells you that that's what you've picked. But again, once you get used to it, it's really not that difficult to use. So, fully customizable buttons down here, a full large interactive screen here that, thanks to an updated processor, is a lot more responsive than earlier models, so very easy and intuitive to use, and then good old-fashioned solid regular buttons down here. So far I'm liking everything, especially this old-fashioned volume knob right here. But, and it's my only gripe, it's a hot day. If you look at my face, because we are filming now in a very hot car, clearly we're going to want to use those climate controls. And if I'm driving around these roads and enjoying myself, that means I have to do this. That's one of my pre-selected buttons, or this. Now that's the old regular way of accessing it, and then I'm presented with this screen. Now, once you've had this car for some time and you're used to using it, I'm sure that's not going to be the end of the world. But my goodness, that is not something that's going to be simple for you to navigate while you're driving down the road at 70 miles an hour. This is the brand new steering wheel for the 308. It might look fairly similar, but it is very small. Small means dynamic, so it gives the car a more sporty feel, and obviously Peugeot have gone to an awful lot of effort to make sure that these driver's controls are very tactically located within that driving environment. So you can see I can access everything I need very easily. You are used to previous Peugeots. I have to say, one of the features I really liked about them was their gear selector. It just felt great. And ordinarily, this is fine. This is the new digital approach to selecting your gear. The only thing I'm not in love with about this, if you have to do a lot of maneuvering, which you do while you're filming, you go back and forth from drive to reverse, it's just not as satisfying from a tactile perspective, but it does the job, and most people aren't going to be doing quite as much maneuvering as we are. Further back, the drive mode selector, because we have a hybrid here, that means that I can pick between how the car is going to function. And if Cornelius can show you on the screen, that means we can select between sport, hybrid or electric. Obviously, sport gives us the best performance and the least efficient performance, hybrid the best marriage of the two, and electric for pure drive round town. Now, if you go with one of the hybrid models, according to Peugeot, you will be experiencing a range of up to 60 kilometers on pure electric. But that's not real world usage. So practically speaking, around about, I would say, 40 to 50 kilometers. In keeping with the minimalist design, as we look slightly further across, there's an inductive charging tray here, really nicely discreetly tucked away. Slightly further down, a 12-volt charge point and a USB-C connector to join your phone up to the car for charging and data transfer. Adaptive cup holders. And then slightly further back still, an open armrest with another USB-C connector. Well, as I mentioned earlier, even though the car is longer than its predecessor, the beneficiary of that is the boot, not the rear passenger compartment. So it's really important to see if there's going to be enough room back here to make you comfortable. Also important to remember that, as I said, the driver's seat is currently set for me. So this is a very misleading amount of legroom. So I'm just going to show you a few of the features back here, and then I'll slide over so you can get a much more realistic impression of exactly how comfortable you're going to be. So I think it's fair to say that an estate car should be nicely equipped for rear passengers. After all, you've got enough room and you're more than likely going to want to put some people back here at some point. Well, the 308 doesn't disappoint. As you can see, even though I do have a particularly long torso, I do have just enough headroom. The way that the roof has been sculpted means that you should be comfortable in here up to about 6'1" or even 6'2". I'm actually a little bit surprised. I would have expected there would be more room in here than there is in the hatchback. But at least with uniformity, it's one less thing that you need to decide on if that's a factor of making a decision over which model you'll go with. Well, it's an estate car, so clearly the boot is really rather an important function. As you can see, this one is automatic. I always think that's a very nice feature to have if you can afford it as an option, because it just makes life so much easier. Now, there are huge amounts of thought that have been put into the design of this. Not least, this will drop down to 2 different levels to accommodate whatever needs you have. As you can see, there's storage underneath for charge cables, if you have a hybrid, and also tools for changing tyres. It's quite nicely thought out. We have plenty of space back here. Now, if you're wondering how much, I can tell you that what you're looking at currently is 548 litres of load space. Interestingly, that's because it's the hybrid model. If we'd gone with the internal combustion engine, it would be 608 litres that you can expand up to 1,634. You're going to show my notepad. You can fold down these seats right from back here. Now, I think the reason that hasn't folded is just because of these seat belts. So let me push this down, because I really want to show you they're very excited about this genuinely flat fold that they have here. And I think the only thing that's stopping that being completely flat is these headrests. So if I pull that out of the way and give it a bit more space, let's take a look and see what's powering this thing. I'm a little bit disappointed that this doesn't come with an automatic bonnet lift, but you know what, it doesn't matter. This is what it's concealing. This is one of the 2 available hybrids. Either way, it's going to be a 1.6 litre petrol engine being supported by an 81 kilowatt electric motor. Now, that should in principle give you optimally a 60-kilometer range. But in realistic practical terms, you're going to be looking closer to 40, that is in test track conditions. Being a plug-in hybrid means that we have different charging options. Now, if you want to go with standard, that's going to mean 3.7 kilowatt charging, and that's going to really produce about 3.5 hours if you're using an uprated power supply, or just a home socket, about 7 hours to fully charge your battery. If you want to go for the more expensive option, you can have 7.4 kilowatt charging, and that will give you a full battery in just 1 hour 55 minutes. The petrols come as a 1.2 litre 3-cylinder engine, and they're available with either 110 horsepower or 130. You can have either one with a 6-speed manual, but if you want the auto, that's only available on the more powerful engine. The diesel, meanwhile, which is still available because Peugeot say they still want to provide that for the business sector, 1.5 litre engine, 4-cylinder, blue HDI at 130 horsepower, and that comes either as manual or automatic. Oftentimes when you see new versions of old models, they really haven't done that much to the underpinnings, but here a significant evolution has taken place. The most noticeable of which, when you really start driving the car, is the chassis. It's a lot more taut and responsive, and that makes the drive a lot firmer and, bluntly, a lot more fun. Well, clearly we're driving the hybrid model here, and we are driving the more powerful version of the two that are available. So we do have a fair amount to play with, and on these lovely windy roads, you really do get to have the best of the experience of the agile abilities of this car. Well, I say that, but I will give it one caveat. Would like to talk briefly about how good of an idea you guys think that hybrids are in general. In principle, they make sense. Of course, you're getting much better gas mileage and you get the best of both worlds. The downside is you obviously also get the worst of both worlds. Now, in performance terms, you recognize the advantage of a hybrid as soon as you take off. But once you start putting it through some windy roads, you realize one of the major drawbacks, and that's weight. This car, being a hybrid, has batteries, and that means an extra 300 plus kilograms on board. Ouch, that's going to make a significant difference to handling. Now, Peugeot have done a lot to remediate that. As I already said, the chassis makes a huge difference to the handling. This nice small steering wheel makes not only the drive feel incredibly responsive and almost game-like, but the steering rack is really tight as well. And that means you get a very responsive experience when you handle corners. But physics are physics and you cannot cheat them. So in reality, you're also going to get a little bit of pitch because of that weight distribution when you put it through some bumpy terrain. And that's something you really do notice when you have more speed, more power, and longer roads. There's a bit more yaw than you would expect, to be completely honest, and I miss the smaller platform and I miss the lack of that weight of battery. But quibble, quibble, quibble. The long and short of it is the drive is extremely pleasant. Let's break it down. Driving position first off. Well, regular viewers might well know I am a big fan of Peugeot seats. They're not only very comfortable for long journeys, but they're also nicely responsive to you. I am not the lightest guy in the world, so therefore I need a fair bit of support when I sit down, and I get that. Every brand new Peugeot I sit in really makes me feel good about the drive. Now again, I could quibble and say maybe not as much side support as I might like for some of these hairpin bends, but at the same time, I actually don't miss it that much because the seat does such a good job of keeping me where I want to be, which is focused on my drive. Now, talking about focus, come on, you didn't think I was not going to mention the steering wheel and the display? Hooray! Finally, my bizarrely shaped body geometry pays off. I'm delighted to announce that for reasons I can't fully understand, I'm able to not only see the instrument cluster, but also have the steering wheel where I would optimally like it to be. So that's a real plus for me.
Turn left.
Well, thank you very much.
085.
But, and I think it's an important but, in this car, body geometry is very, very important. So please, before you determine that this is right for you, you must take it out for a test drive, because if it weren't for the fact that this steering wheel is perfectly positioned for me, it would be a very different driving experience. So I'm happy to say it works for me, but I'm very interested to know if it works for you. Now, here comes a speed bump. That would be physics again. You can't cheat it. But that said, we do have the larger wheels here at 18 inches, and because of that, you do feel a little less comfort in the ride. So if you're going to spend a lot of your time driving around town, you may want to think about slightly smaller wheels just to get a bit more comfort. But if you want the maximum dynamism in your drive, then you definitely should go with the bigger wheels. Around town, very comfortable, very precise, and despite the fact it's a large car, well, all estates are, it handles like a small one. So you really gain the benefit of that smaller wheel, and the instruments work really well to give you the information you need in a non-cluttered, fussy way, which I'm personally astonished about given how much information is visually in my scope of vision. One feature I really like, and I don't know if this is intended or not, I'm sure you're more than familiar with a hybrid. You have different modes you can select based on how much you want being put back into the battery. Well, that's been massively simplified here in one button that simply says B. And what that does is provide recuperation into the battery from braking. Why do I like that so much? A lot of people complain about that feature. Well, two things. One, its development means it's now not nearly as annoying as it used to be. But two, and this is the surprise added bonus, with the often changing speed limits around French towns, every time I take my foot off the accelerator, I quickly come back below where I'm supposed to be. And that's really important in this car because, much to my extreme pleasure, the driving noise in this car is almost silent. If I speak really quietly, you'll still be able to hear me perfectly. And what's great is even once you pick up speed, that still remains completely true. So that's a massive plus. Obviously, the challenge with that is that you really don't always notice how fast you're going. Just then talking to you, I was, well, I can't say on camera, can I? Going slightly faster than I should. And now, thanks to that B function, I'm back to where I need to be. So I find that really useful because I definitely don't want to be experiencing parking or speeding tickets in France. I have a very positive experience of most elements of the digital technology here, and you're familiar with this as a standard complaint. Heating and cooling controls are not friends to a digital environment. I'm very comfortable with everything else, and the more we talk to our vehicles, the better that system works. But please just leave me with a button that works to put the heating and cooling on and off as and when I need it. That menu is massively distracting, and I have a funny feeling that even if I got very used to it, I would still be tempted to ignore it completely rather than risk being distracted from the road that I'm driving on. Other features of the car that are really significant, you'll notice when you drive, to go very nicely with that taut and responsive steering, you also have crisp and responsive braking. Obviously those things go hand in hand, but it's very pleasing to see how well they're delivered. On a lot of these winding hill roads, you do get surprise cyclists pop out of nowhere, and I've been really pleased by how well and effortlessly that system works. So, 2 thumbs up from me for the drive. I really don't have anything negative to say about the way this car handles and behaves at all. Here we are on the highway, currently driving 95 kilometers per hour, and as you can hear from my voice, cabin noise almost non-existent. Really is a remarkable achievement. It's not that the predecessor was particularly bad in this area, but it was nothing like as good as this. And there are many other cars at this price point that can't deliver half as well. So if a peaceful environment is important to you and you do lots of highway driving, this is absolutely something you should consider. Now, we're standardly in hybrid mode, but if I switch that up just to see what happens when we actually ask it to do sport, find out if there's any significant difference, there we are. I can tell you straight away that you won't really notice anything obvious when you're driving down a highway. Now, why does that matter? It matters because obviously hybrid is the most efficient way of using this vehicle standardly. So it's pleasing to find that that really does deliver. Now, that said, every now and then you do want something a little bit more powerful. So what happens if we indicate, pull out, and see what power we have available? actually quite a pleasing response. Now, French roads being as they are, it won't come as a big surprise to you to learn that I don't have very much opportunity to show you what the upper end of this vehicle is capable of doing, but I can tell you for the size and profile of vehicle, you're going to be more than happy with what this delivers. Now, that did give me an opportunity to mention something else as well. Classic Peugeot style. Every time you indicate, you're going to be hearing that noise. And what I can tell you is, whilst for the first 45 minutes of driving this vehicle, you might feel that that is an absolute deal breaker and that there's no way you can ever adjust to it. Amazingly, you do. It gets to be okay. So that's a nice little French quirk, I think, that's been thrown into the design. It's very distinctive, but in a way, it's also a little bit charming. So, how does it handle on a highway drive? You get the same responsiveness that you have when you're driving on the country roads, but here you also really appreciate the refinement of the vehicle. And the many assistance systems that this car can come loaded with also come into their own. So, if what you're mostly wanting this car to do is highway miles, I can tell you that you're going to be very comfortable and very happy with that decision. This is the lowest spec petrol model with a 6-speed manual gearbox. So a little bit after my own heart. Come on guys, you know I'm a base level kind of a guy. Well, the advantage here is that we have the hatchback and no hybrid engine. So this is literally as far away as we could possibly get from what we've just been driving. And I was actually very anxious to try this if we in any way could, because I'm well aware that lots of people do not get to have the top spec models on their company list when that comes out. So because this will be a very common purchase for a lot of people, I think the base model is what a lot of people will find themselves driving. Well, I'm happy to report the first most obvious thing, which is that losing the hybrid system has a massive effect on weight, as you would expect, and that makes the handling a lot lighter and a lot more town car-like. So just even driving through slow traffic, I feel that I have a lot less to contend with. This has a shorter wheel. Now, this is the cheapest car on offer, so you can't hide that. It is much less refined. Now, gone are those buttons and all of the bells and whistles, and you don't miss them so much, but you do very strongly notice that the functionality of the car has been severely challenged with the reduction in its digital interaction. This is clearly a car that's designed to work with those bells and whistles. Now, the manual gearbox is okay, it's not great, it's very rangy, and for a car with a chassis that's as tightly wound as this one, I just wanted something that felt a little bit more sports-like. But you do get a lot more fun back with that reduction in weight, so swings and roundabouts. My pick of the bunch is probably going to be the hatchback, and I think I'll be in the majority of drivers with that decision. Why? Well, for most of my time, I don't need all of that space back there, and I really do feel that for me to go with an estate, I want my rear passengers to have the advantage of the extra room. The fact that there is no advantage for those guys just makes me think, you know what? I think I can fit more than enough in the back of this hatchback. Now, this has been a very special trip for me. Regular viewers will know that you haven't seen me for a while, and that's obviously because the world has been going through a little bit of turmoil. So I do want to say that I really appreciate being here. It's great to be back. I hope you're pleased to see me, but I know that I wouldn't be here without your support. So if you can, please like, subscribe, please tell us what you think. Please ask any questions if you have them. And one last special mention. The last time I did a Peugeot driving event was with our very dear friend Holger, a very important member of our Autogefühl family, and sadly he's no longer with us. So Holger, this one's for you. I hope you're driving something you really like, and if you can, let us know all about it. Thanks guys, I hope we'll see you all again soon. For now, it's goodbye.